5 minutes, she whispered, tilting her head. No questions. No backing out. He laughed nervously, thinking it was just another silly bet between friends. But when she leaned back, stretched her bare legs out toward him, and slowly pressed her foot right against his face, he froze, not in disgust, not in shock, but in something far more dangerous. Desire. The game was over, and what happened next, neither of them could take back. Welcome to Goddess Foot Confessions. Let's uncover what really happened. It started the way these things usually do, half laughing, half daring, and fully unprepared for the consequences. We were sprawled across the floor of Ava's apartment, a messy tangle of cards, cushions, and empty soda cans. Rain tapped gently on the windows, and the warm lamplight cast soft golden glows on the walls. It was late enough that everything felt just a little looser, like the hour gave permission for risk. Ava sat cross-legged across from me, one eyebrow arched as she dealt the final round of our homemade card game. I should have known the night was about to change. You sure you want to keep playing? She asked, her voice a teasing lilt. You've lost 3 hands in a row. I shrugged, too proud to back down. I've got nothing to lose. Her smile widened, dangerously slow, the kind that suggested she already knew what was coming next. Then let's make it interesting. I remember the way her fingers tapped the deck, deliberate, unhurried. She didn't break eye contact. There was something in her expression that dared me to say yes before I even knew the terms. If I win this hand, she said slowly, you do exactly what I say for 5 minutes. No questions. And if I win? I asked. She grinned. Then I'll owe you the same. It felt harmless. A game within the game. A test of willpower wrapped in laughter. I agreed before she could change her mind. The cards were dealt. My heart beat faster with each reveal, not because I was close to winning, because I was losing, and badly. When the final card landed in her pile, she leaned back with the air of someone who already had a plan. Take off your shoes, she said, almost casually, and come sit by me. The request wasn't strange. Not exactly, but there was something about the way she said it, calm, sure, without a hint of hesitation, that made the room feel warmer, smaller. I hesitated only a second. Then I moved. She patted the floor beside her, bare feet tucked beneath her, the soft arch of one foot exposed under the hem of her leggings. I sat down, not quite sure what I'd just agreed to. Ava's smile lingered as I sat beside her, but it wasn't the usual kind, the playful grin I was used to seeing when we bantered or teased each other. This one held weight, something unreadable just beneath the curve of her lips. Her eyes flicked toward me, then down on my socked feet and back again. It should have felt ridiculous, but it didn't. There was an odd stillness to the moment, as though we'd stepped out of time and into some private current only the two of us could sense. You always sit so stiff, she murmured, voice low and amused. Relax a little. She leaned back on her palms, her bare toes stretching just slightly, flexing in the space between us. The motion caught my eye before I could stop it, and when I looked up, her gaze was already waiting, sharp and knowing. I flushed, suddenly aware of everything. How close we were, how quiet the room had become, how her presence seemed to fill all the empty air around us. You okay? She asked, tilting her head. But the way she asked wasn't casual. It was careful, intentional, like she already knew the answer. Yeah, I said too quickly. Just didn't expect this to get so intense. She laughed softly, a warm, breathy sound that settled in my chest like steam. It's only a game, remember? Her tone was light, but something about it felt off, like she was reminding me of the rules because she was about to break them. Her foot moved again, this time grazing the floor, brushing the edge of my leg like a whisper. Not enough to be definite, just enough to be noticed. I held my breath. Then she turned to me, her smile widening just slightly, the corners of her mouth curving in that way that made my skin buzz. You always follow the rules, she said, voice almost too soft. But I think you kind of like it when someone else takes control. I couldn't find the words to argue. Her eyes stayed on mine, unblinking, like she was peeling something back without ever touching me. And I knew, in that stillness, this wasn't about cards anymore. Ava didn't rush. That was the part that disarmed me most. how deliberate she was with everything, as though time bent around her intentions. The pause between her words, the subtle shift of her knee brushing mine, the way she sat perfectly still yet commanded all of my attention. I waited, expecting her to laugh and tell me to go fetch something, or maybe dare me to do something ridiculous like dance in the hallway. But she didn't. She just watched me. "You said 5 minutes." I reminded her, try to sound playful. It came out thin, nervous. "That's all you get." She nodded, amused. "Then stop wasting them." I blinked, not sure what I was wasting exactly. I was already next to her, already inside this strange, quiet gravity she'd created. Her fingers moved to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, slow and graceful. Then she pointed toward the edge of the couch where her feet rested gently on a pillow, soles upturned. "Kiss the top of my foot." The words didn't register at first. I stared at her, trying to decide if she was joking. But her face gave nothing away. She wasn't teasing. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was waiting. I started, then stopped. She tilted her head again, that same assessing gaze. "You don't have to. You can forfeit the game. But you don't want to, do you?" I didn't know what I wanted. Or maybe I did, and didn't know how to admit it. There was a strange heat blooming in my chest, equal parts embarrassment and anticipation. My eyes flicked to her foot, resting there, soft and pale in the dim light, her toes flexing just slightly, as if to test my attention. And God, it worked. I couldn't look away. Curiosity drowned the hesitation. Not because I was sure of what I was doing, but because she made me want to find out why this felt like more than a dare. I shifted closer, the pillow dipping under my weight. Her breath hitched almost imperceptibly, and I heard it, that silent approval hidden behind her calm. I was playing by her rules now. My lips hovered just above the skin, the space between us no longer measured in inches, but in something far less tangible. In tension, the quiet ache of not knowing what came next. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, from the soft curve of her foot, and it struck me how intimate it was, this moment we'd stumbled into. A dare, yes, but it didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like a shift. When I finally leaned in and brushed my lips lightly across the top of her foot, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't drawn out. It was soft, quick, reverent. But it was enough. Enough to change something between us. Ava inhaled, not loudly, but enough that I noticed, and when I glanced up, her expression had shifted. Still composed, still Ava, but there was a crack in that careful exterior. Her eyes had darkened, not with anger or surprise, but with a kind of fierce attention I wasn't used to receiving. "That wasn't so hard," she said quietly, but her voice wasn't teasing anymore. It was low, almost thoughtful. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was tight, my pulse loud in my ears. I wasn't even sure why. It was just a game, wasn't it? We made a bet. I'd followed through. But the air between us now was different, charged in a way I couldn't quite define. And beneath the initial flush of embarrassment, something else was beginning to surface. A strange kind of thrill. She shifted her position, drawing one leg beneath her and extending the other so her heel rested near my thigh. "You're not what I expected," she said, gaze steady. "Expected?" I managed, my voice rougher than I meant. "You pretend not to notice me. But you do. Always." I looked at her, and for once, didn't try to deny it. Her words weren't accusatory. They were observant, honest. She'd seen something I hadn't realized I was showing. Her toes curled slightly against the fabric of the couch, brushing me in the smallest of ways. Accidental or not, the game, whatever it had been, had cracked open something else. And for the first time that night, I wasn't sure who was playing who. The silence after her words felt heavier than anything she'd said before. It settled over us like a second skin, dense and alive with meaning. I couldn't tell if she was waiting for me to react or just savoring the stillness. But either way, I sat frozen, unsure where the boundaries were now. Whatever line we'd been towing, we'd crossed it. Maybe not fully. Not yet. But the echoes of that kiss were still lingering, like a fingerprint pressed against my chest. She watched me for a moment longer, then leaned back slowly, propping herself up on one elbow. Her foot was still resting near my thigh, casually placed, but now I couldn't look at it the same way. It felt like a placeholder, like the next move was mine. Truth or dare? She asked suddenly. I blinked, caught off guard by the shift, though it wasn't really a shift at all. Just a different name for the same power dynamic. Dare, I said, because I didn't trust what the truth might pull from me. Ava's lips curled, but not into a smile. Not exactly. It was something more serious. Focused. She sat up again, slowly and with purpose, and reached for the tie of her hoodie, undoing it lazily as if considering what to say next. Then she nodded toward the floor between us. Lay down. My heart skipped. I hesitated. She didn't push, just waited, patient, assured. And maybe that's what made me listen. I lowered myself onto the rug, the soft texture cool against the back of my neck. I stared up at the ceiling, the sound of my breathing louder than I wanted it to be. I could feel her shift beside me, but I didn't know what she was doing until her foot hovered above my chest, then lower, resting lightly just below my collarbone. My breath caught. This isn't about dominance, she said, barely above a whisper. It's about trust. Her foot slid upward, the ball of it brushing against my jaw. Light as air. You could stop me anytime. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because somehow, this wasn't too far at all. It was exactly where something in me had been daring us to go. The room had fallen into a hush so complete, I could hear the shift of fabric as she adjusted her position beside me. Her foot still rested gently along the curve of my jaw, unmoving, not forceful, just present. And yet it carried more weight than if she'd spoken. The warmth of her skin against mine was a quiet anchor, rooting me to the floor, to the moment, to her. I didn't move. I didn't want to. She didn't speak, and neither did I. There was something sacred in the silence, something neither of us wanted to disturb. The game had dissolved entirely, leaving only this strange intimacy suspended in soft light and stillness. The low hum of the rain outside seemed to echo our breath, slow and even, like the rhythm of something ancient and unspoken. From where I lay, I could see her face in profile. Calm, serene. Her eyes weren't watching me, but they weren't far. She was somewhere between attention and thought, the kind of inward quiet that made her seem untouchable, like a painting left undisturbed on a wall. I'd always known Ava was different, sharp, unafraid, grounded in herself in a way that unsettled people. But tonight, something gentler was showing through the cracks. Not softness exactly, but depth. A quiet she rarely let anyone near. The gentle weight of her foot shifted, pressing just slightly more firmly against my cheek before pulling away. The absence was like cold air rushing in after warmth. She drew her legs beneath her, and for a moment, all I could do was stay still and feel the echo of her against my skin. Then she spoke, voice low, careful. I'm not trying to mess with you. I turned my head toward her, uncertain what she meant. Her eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. I just wanted to know if you'd follow, she said. Not where I was leading. Just that you'd come with me, even for a little while. I sat up slowly, unsure what to say. But something in me recognized the honesty in her tone. This wasn't about dares anymore. It was about seeing and being seen, in silence, in stillness, without armor. And I'd never felt more exposed, or more understood. I sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the carpet between us. The fibers formed invisible lines, paths, boundaries, something for my eyes to follow when I couldn't look at her directly. Ava sat a few feet away, her back resting against the couch, one knee drawn up, the other leg extended, toes idly flexing in the hush. The rain had faded to a mist, and all that remained was the occasional soft drip from the eaves. Stillness clung to the room like breath on glass. I didn't know how we gotten here, not really. One moment we were playing cards, laughing over rules we made up on the spot. The next, she was on the floor with me, her foot resting against my face like it belonged there. And I'd let it. No, I'd wanted it, or wanted what came with it. The weight, the focus, her undivided presence. But now, with nothing spoken and nothing demanded, my mind was spiraling. Thoughts didn't come in full sentences, just fragments. Did this mean something? Was it still a game? Was I losing myself in it, or finally finding something I hadn't known I needed? I glanced at her, hoping for a sign, but she was perfectly still, eyes closed, lips parted just slightly like she was caught in thought or sleep. The arch of her foot moved slightly, tracing an invisible shape in the air before settling again. I keep thinking about that moment, I said quietly, unsure why I was speaking. When you told me it wasn't about dominance. That was about trust. Her eyes opened slowly. You didn't flinch, she said, as if that explained everything. I nodded, swallowing. It's not that I wasn't nervous. I didn't want to disappoint you. Something flickered in her gaze. Not pity, not amusement, just understanding. You didn't, she said. You surprised me. My chest tightened. I didn't know which part of me she was seeing, but it felt like she'd stepped inside a place I usually kept locked. The lines in the carpet blurred. The ones in my mind, too. And I wasn't sure anymore where I ended and this strange connection between us began. The tension had shifted. It no longer sat heavy in the air. It pulsed like a current humming just beneath the surface of everything we did and didn't say. I could feel it in the way Ava moved now, slower, more deliberate, like she was reading the room through sensation instead of sight. Her eyes stayed on me longer, her silences stretched out with intent. It was subtle, but unmistakable. I wasn't the one steering anymore. And strangely, that didn't make me feel small. It made me feel real. She reached for her water bottle, took a sip, then tilted her head as she looked at me. You always try so hard to stay composed, she said, not as a judgment, but an observation. I wonder what would happen if you let go. I stiffened. She smiled, like she expected that reaction. Not everything needs control to have meaning, she added. There was something about the way she said it that landed hard. It wasn't that she wanted to strip away my defenses. She just wanted me to set them down willingly. I'd spent most of my life gripping tight to who I thought I was supposed to be. Calm, reasonable, guarded. And yet here I was on the floor in a quiet apartment, willingly surrendering to a game I no longer understood. She leaned forward then, bare feet gliding softly across the rug as she closed the space between us. When she reached me, she didn't touch my face or my hands. Instead, she took one of my arms and gently guided me to lie down again. I obeyed without question. Her fingers moved with quiet certainty, adjusting the angle of my jaw, brushing hair from my forehead. Then, just as I began to settle, she placed the ball of her foot on my chest, steady and warm. It didn't feel humiliating. It felt intentional, a kind of anchoring I hadn't known I craved. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her foot rested there like a promise, like a weight I didn't want to shake off. And in that moment, losing control didn't feel like failure. It felt like the first real victory I'd had in years. Her foot stayed on my chest just long enough for me to forget where I ended and she began. The warmth of her skin sank into me like a slow tide, spreading from the point of contact and echoing somewhere deep in my ribs. I didn't dare move. I didn't want to disrupt the balance she had created, this fragile equilibrium where I felt more seen lying on the floor than I had standing upright in most of my life. Then, just as gently as it had arrived, the weight lifted. I opened my eyes to find her crouched beside me, watching with that unreadable look she wore when her thoughts were louder than her words. Her hair had fallen slightly over her face, and in the golden wash of lamplight, she looked softer, still powerful, but softened by whatever stirred behind her calm expression. You okay? She asked, but her voice was quieter now, less sure of itself. I nodded, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask her what all this meant, if it meant anything at all, but I didn't have the words. My throat tightened with the weight of too much unsaid. So instead, I sat up slowly, breath unsteady, and met her eyes. That was when it happened. Her foot, bare and resting idly beside her, shifted just enough that her toes grazed my knee. Light, barely there, but electric. My breath hitched. She felt it too. I saw it in the flicker of her gaze, in the way her lips parted ever so slightly, like she'd been caught thinking something she wasn't ready to admit. It wasn't the touch itself that shook me. It was everything behind it. The invitation, the awareness, the quiet permission to feel what I was already feeling. Neither of us pulled away. The silence grew thicker between us, no longer empty but full, crowded with unspoken questions and half-formed confessions. I didn't need to ask if she meant it. I could feel it in the way her body stayed still, in the way her eyes didn't flinch. Something was changing between us. It had already begun, and neither of us seemed ready or willing to stop it. The air felt different now, heavier in the quiet, like it had taken on weight from everything we hadn't said aloud. Ava didn't move right away after that subtle touch. Neither did I. The space between us was charged, the kind of fragile electricity that makes even the smallest movement feel intentional. She shifted slightly, not in a rush, just enough to stretch her legs out again. Her feet now directly in front of me, toes pointed toward my lap like an unspoken challenge. I try not to look. I try to focus on her eyes, on the conversation we weren't having, but something in me gave. Something that didn't care about control or composure anymore. My gaze fell. Her feet rested lightly on the carpet, soft arches curving with natural ease, her toes flexing just enough to draw attention. And even though she didn't speak, I knew she noticed me looking. She moved one foot forward and nudged my thigh gently. A simple, almost innocent gesture, but it landed with precision. I tensed, not from discomfort, but from the rush of heat that rose up like instinct. Pride told me to pull away, to joke, to laugh it off, to pretend none of this was doing anything to me. But I didn't move. Her heel pressed gently against my leg, tracing a slow, deliberate line toward my knee. She was testing me again, seeing if I would let her lead, seeing if I would sit still, even as the remnants of who I thought I was began to crumble under her touch. "This doesn't make you weak," she said quietly, as if she could see the struggle written all over my face. "Letting go doesn't mean you lose anything." I looked up at her. There was no mockery in her eyes, only clarity, steady, inviting. "I know," I whispered, unsure if I meant it yet. But I wanted to. I wanted to believe that giving her this part of me, this quiet surrender, wasn't a defeat but a choice. Her foot slid higher, resting on my chest again, just like before. But this time, it wasn't about the dare. It was about her claiming the space I had finally offered. She moved closer without making a sound, the soft rustle of her leggings against the rug barely audible over the beat of my heart. The room was warm, the kind of warmth that settles deep in your chest and makes everything else feel distant. I could smell her now, vanilla, subtle and clean, a scent that clung to her skin like a memory I didn't know I had. She was inches away, her knee brushing mine, her eyes never leaving my face. There was no need for words. The silence said more than anything spoken could. My breath caught as she leaned forward just slightly, her foot still resting against my chest like an anchor, holding me in place. Her toes moved gently, shifting in rhythm with her breathing, brushing against my collarbone, tracing along the edge where fabric met skin. Each movement was slow, deliberate, measured not in distance but in intent. "Do you feel it?" she asked softly, her voice low enough that it didn't quite break the silence, only stirred it. I nodded. My voice wasn't ready. Her fingers reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, her touch feather-light. The gesture was oddly intimate, not playful, not commanding, just present. She was here with me, and I felt that presence in every inch of my body. There was no room left for pretending this was still a game. Her bare foot pressed more firmly into my chest, not forcefully, just enough to ground me. I could feel the shape of each toe, the soft arch, the curve of her heel. Every inch of contact was a wordless conversation. She was asking, not demanding, guiding, not pushing, and I was letting her. She tilted her head slightly, her hair falling across her cheek, catching the glow of the nearby lamp. The vanilla in the air wrapped around me like a whisper I didn't want to end. She was so close now, I could feel the heat radiating from her body, the quiet thrum of her breath mingling with mine. I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew I didn't want to be anywhere else. Time slowed to the point of stillness. Not the kind of stillness that comes from silence alone, but the kind that pulses just beneath the surface, between breaths, between glances, between the inches of space we hadn't yet closed. Ava didn't speak, and neither did I. We just sat there, tethered by something invisible and fragile and impossibly real. Her foot remained on my chest, and it was that quiet pressure that kept me grounded, that kept me from floating into the rush of everything I was feeling. Her toes moved slightly, a subtle shift, tracing a line across my collarbone, and my breath hitched. She felt it. I knew she did because she paused. That stillness returned, thick with tension, with possibility. The air between us wasn't empty. It was charged, filled with every word we were afraid to say. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something in her expression I hadn't before. Not playfulness, not control, but gentleness. There was care in the way she touched me. Not a carelessness, but a thoughtfulness, like she was listening to something in me I hadn't yet put into words. Like she already understood. She adjusted her position, and the motion brought her closer. I could feel the warmth of her leg brushing mine, the soft exhale of her breath near my neck. My pulse surged, but I didn't move. I didn't want to break it. The stillness that wrapped around us like a blanket we both needed more than either of us would admit. "I can hear you thinking," she whispered, voice so quiet I barely caught it. I swallowed, the sound loud in the hush. "I don't know what this is," I said honestly. She nodded, brushing her foot down to rest against my ribcage. "Neither do I, but it doesn't feel wrong." It didn't. That was the strangest part. Nothing about this felt like a mistake. It felt like something waking up inside me that had always been there, waiting. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the warmth, the quiet, the scent of vanilla still floating between us. And in that space between breaths, I let go. The space between us became its own kind of contact, electric, trembling, full of everything we weren't yet ready to say aloud. Her foot had returned to the rug, but it didn't matter. I still felt the imprint of her on my skin, like she'd left a mark that couldn't be seen, only sensed. She sat with one leg folded under her, the other bent at the knee, toes idly grazing the edge of her own calf. The movement was small, unconscious maybe, but it pulled my attention like gravity. Ava noticed. I saw it in the slight lift of her brow, the flicker of something in her eyes, not smugness, but awareness. She didn't need to touch me again to make herself felt. Every shift in her body, every breath she took was enough. I was attuned to her now in a way that startled me. Every movement she made registered like a whisper directly to my chest. We didn't speak. It was safer not to. The silence let us stay suspended, untouched, but completely connected. My fingers curled slightly against the rug, as if holding on to something invisible. She mirrored the motion, brushing her fingertips along the seam of her leggings. No contact, and yet I felt it. She stretched her leg out again, slowly, and her foot came to rest just beside my thigh, close but not quite touching. The air between her skin and mine felt impossibly loud. I stared at that distance, that narrow band of tension, and suddenly it felt like the only thing in the world that mattered. "Do you feel that too?" she asked softly. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. My mouth was dry, my thoughts a mess of heat and restraint. "Yes," I finally said, "like you're touching me even when you're not." Her gaze dropped to where her foot hovered beside my leg, then back to my face. "That's how I know this is real," she murmured. "Because I don't have to touch you to know you feel it." The room held its breath around us. We stayed just like that, so close, not quite touching, the ache between us louder than any words we could say. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was dense, full of meaning, charged like the air before a summer storm. Ava hadn't moved her foot from beside my leg, and I hadn't shifted either. That small, unclosed distance had become sacred, like a thread stretched taut between us that neither of us dared disturb. Her eyes never left mine. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. She just looked, and I felt everything in that gaze. Questions. Permission. The slow unfolding of something neither of us had named. The room was dim, lit only by the low amber glow from a lamp in the corner. Shadows curled in the corners. The world outside felt like it had vanished, leaving just this, just her, just me, and the unspoken tension that crackled like fire in dry leaves. I felt a pulse in my throat, in my fingertips. The urge to move, to close that small space, battled with the strange peace of holding it open. Waiting was a kind of ache I hadn't known I'd miss once it ended. Ava leaned forward just slightly, her elbows resting on her knees, and the shift sent a ripple through my whole body. She was closer now, but not quite close enough to touch. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. I keep thinking I should say something, but it feels like if I do, I'll ruin it. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She understood. The silence was speaking for us now, saying what words couldn't. Her eyes dropped, briefly, to my hand on the floor. Her own hand moved, mirroring the path of her gaze. Fingers extended, sliding forward inch by inch until they hovered next to mine, close enough to feel warmth, not skin. She stopped there, held it. We didn't look at our hands. We stayed in each other's eyes. And something passed between us then, stronger than touch, heavier than a kiss. A truth neither of us could speak, not yet. But it lived in that silence, in that stillness, in that breath we both held together. Whatever this was, it was real, and it was louder than anything we'd ever dared to say. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every move, every pause, every breath she took was calculated, not in a cruel or manipulative way, but with a quiet confidence that left no room for pretense. Ava didn't need to speak to take control. She simply existed in a way that drew everything toward her. And me, I followed. Willingly, helplessly, even when I didn't fully understand why. She shifted her weight again, reclining just enough to stretch her legs toward me. Her toes flexed, brushing the edge of the rug, casual and precise. I felt my gaze fall, just for a second too long, and by the time I looked back up, her lips were curved into a knowing smile. "Caught you," she murmured. Heat rose to my face, but I didn't look away this time. I held her gaze, even though every instinct told me to break it. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time I realized how much she had been watching, not just tonight, but always. She saw the flickers in me, the hesitation, the curiosity I try to hide. "You stare like you're trying not to," she said, her voice low and calm. "Like you think looking too long will give you away." "Maybe it will," I said, surprising myself. Her smile deepened, not out of amusement, but satisfaction. She liked honesty. She fed on it, not the kind that spilled out in words, but the kind that lived in glances, in the unguarded moments between sentences. This was her game, drawing out the things I was too afraid to name. She shifted again, sliding closer, just enough that the tips of her toes brushed my knee. I didn't move. "I don't mind being looked at," she said. "I just like knowing what it does to you." I swallowed, unsure if I was supposed to answer, or if this, my silence, my reaction, was the answer she wanted. She leaned forward slightly, her foot lifting, pausing midair before gently settling across my thigh. Her eyes never wavered, and in that moment, I understood the rules. This wasn't about control. It was about permission, and I had already given it. The moment her foot rested across my thigh, something inside me tipped. Not broken, shifted. Like a balance I hadn't realized I was holding too tightly had finally given way. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull back. I just felt it. The heat of her skin, the soft weight of her presence, and the quiet assertion layered beneath the gesture. There was nothing forceful in the way she touched me, and yet it held more authority than anything loud or demanding ever could. Ava didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She simply watched, calm and still, as if waiting to see what I would do with the space she had claimed. Her confidence wasn't loud, it was absolute, and I realized that it wasn't just her foot on my leg. It was her choice, her presence, her understanding of me before I understood myself. My hands were resting palms down on the rug, grounding me. I felt strangely unmoored despite the steadiness of the floor. She had become the fixed point, and I was circling her without resistance. The silence between us returned, but now it felt different. Before, it had been full of tension, of breath held in the dark. Now it was fuller, heavier. It hummed with acknowledgement. "You're not fighting it anymore," she said softly, her voice almost gentle. "I can feel it. I didn't know I was. I answered, and it was true. What had started as a game, a dare, had evolved into something I didn't have a name for. It wasn't about control anymore. Not really. It was about surrendering something that had never served me to begin with, the need to lead, to define, to armor myself. Ava shifted slightly, just enough for her heel to press lightly against the inside of my thigh. My pulse quickened, but I stayed still. The old version of me would have laughed, deflected, tried to reclaim the moment with humor. But this version, the one sitting here, breath shallow and eyes locked on hers, was done pretending. She didn't need to move again. I already felt undone. And for the first time, I didn't feel weaker for it. I felt seen, held, and quietly, irrevocably hers. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, soft-footed and cautious, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. I felt it bloom in the quiet moments, like now, as Ava's foot rested lightly against my thigh and neither of us said a word. She hadn't asked for anything more. She didn't need to. What she wanted wasn't obedience. It was willingness, presence. And for the first time in a long time, I was completely present. She studied me, her gaze calm but deep, like she was listening for a sound only I could make. My breathing had slowed, synced with hers somehow, as if my body had decided to trust her before my mind had. The air between us had weight, but not the heavy kind. It was warm, full, laced with meaning that couldn't be spoken without reducing it. Ava leaned back slightly, her foot still in place, her posture relaxed. You know, she said after a long pause, most people flinch when they feel vulnerable. You didn't. Not really. I let the words settle before answering. I've spent most of my life trying to stay in control. But with you, I don't feel the need to anymore. She nodded, like she'd known that already but wanted me to hear myself say it. Trust is a strange feeling. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand fanfare. It shows up quietly, and you don't even realize it's there until you're already standing on something solid you hadn't noticed forming beneath your feet. It was in the way I stayed still beneath her gaze. In the way I let her guide the silence. In the way her foot rested on me like it belonged there, and how I no longer questioned it. She curled her toes slightly, just a subtle movement, but it grounded me even more. I looked down at them, then back up at her, and something passed between us. Not desire, not yet, not fully, but something just as intimate. I didn't need to ask what we were. I didn't need her to explain what this meant. All I needed was this moment, and the trust we had quietly, undeniably built within it. Her gaze didn't waver. That was the most disarming thing about her. How she could hold eye contact without flinching, without retreating, like she wasn't afraid of anything she might find in me. It was steady, quiet, but unwavering, and it pinned me in place more thoroughly than any touch could have. Ava didn't need to speak to make herself known. She just looked, and I stayed where I was because part of me was terrified of what would happen if I looked away. We weren't touching anymore, not physically. Her foot had slipped back to the floor, her body reclined again, one arm draped lazily across her lap. But the tension hadn't broken. If anything, it had grown. Her presence didn't need closeness to be felt. It stretched across the inches of space like heat, like gravity, pulling me in without movement. I shifted slightly, unsure why the moment felt heavier now than it had when her skin was against mine. Maybe because this was the part one couldn't fake. The looking, the seeing, the being seen. Her eyes held mine, unblinking, and I could feel every second of silence as a weight across my chest. What are you thinking? I asked finally, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't smile. She didn't soften. She just answered, that you're still deciding if you're allowed to want this. Her words landed like a stone in still water. No ripple at first, just a quiet sinking. I blinked, throat tight, because she was right. I was caught between instinct and doubt, between the comfort of surrender and the fear of what it might say about me. I don't want to push you, she added, but I'm not going to pretend I don't see it. I see everything. She leaned forward just slightly, not to close the space, but to bring her voice nearer. Her eyes stayed on mine the entire time. You don't have to be afraid of being seen. Not with me. Something inside me cracked. not in pain, but in relief. Her eyes never left mine, and for once, I didn't need to look away. There was a pause between us, a long, breathless space where neither of us moved. But everything was shifting, inside, beneath the surface. Her words still echoed in my chest. I see everything. And somehow, instead of shame, I felt something closer to freedom. She knew what I was wrestling with. She wasn't asking me to admit it. She was just holding the space, letting it become real without needing it spoken aloud. I lowered my gaze, not out of submission, but out of reverence. I didn't know how else to honor what was unfolding between us. She was still watching me, eyes calm, steady almost too much. Like she could see the part of me that had always been starved for this kind of closeness, but never knew how to ask for it. I'd lived most of my life in restraint, in rules, in self-protection. But now, with her, those walls didn't serve me anymore. They only muffled what I was finally ready to feel. I shifted closer, slowly, carefully, until I was kneeling before her. Not because she told me to, because I wanted to be there. Because something in me was tired of pretending I didn't need to be seen, to be chosen, to be wanted. Ava didn't speak. She just moved one leg slightly, allowing her foot to rest gently on my thigh. Her ankle relaxed, her toes pointing toward me. The contact was feather-light, but I felt it everywhere. My fingers twitched at my sides. I don't want control, I whispered, voice rough. Not here. Not with you. She nodded, her gaze softening just enough to let warmth in. I know. There was hunger in the air now, but it wasn't rushed. It wasn't loud. It was patient, steady, wrapped in something deeper than impulse. I looked at her foot, then back up at her face, asking without words. She answered with a slight nod, permission, not instruction. And as I leaned forward, brushing my lips gently against the top of her foot, it wasn't about giving in. It was about choosing to. Willingly, fully, somewhere between humility and hunger, I had found something that felt frighteningly like peace. My lips lingered for a breath too long, not out of hesitation, but reverence. The quiet press of skin against skin felt like crossing a threshold into what I wasn't sure yet. When I finally pulled back, I didn't look up right away. I didn't need to. I could feel her watching me, not with judgment or amusement, but with that same steady attention she had held from the beginning. The kind that made it impossible to hide. The kind that made hiding feel unnecessary. Her toes flexed slightly against my leg, a subtle movement that grounded me again. My hands remained on my thighs, fingers curled loosely, unsure what to do with themselves now that so much of me was already laid bare. I took a breath, and it shook a little. Not from fear, but from the weight of how different this felt. You're not pretending anymore, Ava said, her voice low, like it didn't want to disrupt the moment, but needed to be heard. I don't think I can, I murmured, finally lifting my eyes to meet hers. She was calm, always calm, but something had changed. There was a flicker of emotion behind her gaze now, something close to tenderness, or maybe something even softer than that. A kind of recognition. You never had to, she replied. But I know how hard it is to stop. I nodded, the words striking a place I hadn't touched in years. She wasn't just playing a role in some quiet power game. She was seeing me, unarmored, unfiltered, and she wasn't pulling away. Neither of us moved for a while. We just stayed in the stillness, in the truth of what was growing between us. It wasn't about the dares anymore, or the soft provocations. It was about what they had revealed. The space we had stepped into was unfamiliar, but clear, real in a way that most things in my life hadn't been. And standing on the edge of it, feeling her eyes on me, feeling my pulse quiet in the safety of her gaze, I realized something I hadn't expected. I didn't want to go back. Not ever. There was something in the way my body leaned toward her now, not with urgency, but with trust that told me more than my thoughts ever could. I didn't plan it. I didn't even notice it until I felt the space between us vanish again, until the warmth of her skin was close enough to breathe. We weren't touching, not yet, but every part of me was drawn to her like it had finally stopped resisting something it was never meant to fight. Ava watched me, quiet and steady, as though reading each shift in my posture like a sentence only she could understand. I could feel the tension in my jaw, the way my hands stayed open at my sides, how my breath had found a rhythm that matched hers without ever meaning to. These weren't decisions. These were truths my body had chosen for me. She reached out, brushing her fingertips along my wrist. The contact was light, almost nothing, but I felt it like a current on my arm. Her eyes searched mine for hesitation, and when she didn't find it, she let her hand linger. "There's no pretending left in you," she said, more to herself than to me. "I don't think my body knows how anymore," I replied, surprised by the rawness in my voice. She smiled, not smugly, but with a softness that made my chest ache. "That's how I know this is real. Your body's been saying yes, even while your mind kept asking questions." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Everything about the way I knelt there in front of her, the way I let her touch guide me, said more than words ever could. Ava shifted slightly, drawing one leg underneath her and resting the other across my lap. I held still as she adjusted, not because I was afraid to move, but because I didn't want to disturb the honesty in the moment. Her foot, warm and familiar now, settled lightly against my hand, and my fingers closed around it without hesitation. Some things the body can't lie about, and mine was finally telling the truth. The shift was quiet but absolute. Whatever tension had existed before, between wanting and resisting, between hiding and yielding, was gone. It melted away in the warmth of her foot in my hand, in the way our breathing had fallen into sync without effort. We weren't being watched, not by each other, not by the world, not even by our own expectations. That invisible audience we carry around, the one that whispers what's right, what's too much, what's allowed, had gone silent. Ava leaned back against the couch, one arm draped over a cushion, her body relaxed in a way that made everything feel safe. She didn't say anything as I traced my thumb gently along the top of her foot, following the subtle curve of bone and skin. It was a motion without purpose, but it felt necessary. Grounding. I wasn't seeking a reaction. I was simply being with her, with myself. Her eyes were half-lidded now, watching but not pressing. Trust hummed in the space between us like soft light. I wasn't afraid of her gaze anymore. I wasn't waiting for judgment or instruction. What had started as a dare, a game, a way to test limits, had become something far more vulnerable, something neither of us had expected, but both of us were choosing. "You're different now," she said quietly, her voice barely disturbing the stillness. "I think I'm just finally honest," I answered. She nodded slowly, as if she already knew. "I like this version of you. You're not performing anymore." Neither was she. That was what made this moment feel sacred. We had dropped the roles, tease and pretender, bold and hesitant, and found each other beneath them. There was no script left, just presence, just the hum of a shared rhythm no one else could hear. I lifted her foot slightly, brushing my lips against her ankle, not to provoke, not to ask, just to say, "I'm here, I see you, and I'm not afraid of being seen anymore." Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing against the windows like a soft reminder that the world still turned. But in here, we had stepped into something entirely our own, and no one was watching anymore. I don't know when it stopped being a game. There was no moment, no decisive line we stepped over. It just faded, dissolved into something quieter, deeper, more human. The dares, the teasing, those were only doorways.